Good morning. I will now call this review committee meeting to order at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, June 9th of 2021. Good morning. This review committee meeting is to give the scores and to submit a recommendation to Florida Housing's Board of Directors regarding the proposals submitted in response to RFA 2021-108 for financing for the development of housing for persons with developmental disabilities. This meeting was noticed in the Florida Administrative Register pursuant to Section 120.525 of Florida statute. In response to this RFA, one application was received. A list of the applications is attached to the agenda. The agenda for today includes introductions for the record. I will then open the floor for discussion and comments among the review committee members, followed by the committee providing scores for the record. Based on the scores, the committee will make recommendations to the board, and finally, we will adjourn the meeting. We're using webinars for the review committee today. Although external parties may be attending by phone to listen to this call, it is recommended that all attendees use the computer link available on the RFA webpage to both hear the call and see the spreadsheets we will be creating. All microphones have been muted for audience members. Additionally, the ability for attendees to ask questions during this meeting has been disabled. All committee members and non-committee members with a speaking role have open microphones unless you choose to mute the microphone. With that, let's go ahead and take roll. I'll announce the review committee members and non-committee members who are expected to be on this call for the record. Committee members, when you hear your name, please verbally confirm that you can both hear me and that you can see the spreadsheet on your computer. I'll start with myself. I'm Tracy Willis. I'm a committee member and I'm the chairperson, and I can see the screen. Rachel Grice.
Hi, yes, I can hear you and I can see the screen.
Thanks, Rachel. Corey McDougall.
Yes, I can hear you and see the screen.
Thank you, Corey. Elaine Roberts.
Yes, I can hear you and I can see the screen.
Thanks, Elaine. Diana Fields.
Good morning. I can hear you and I can see the spreadsheet.
Thanks, Diana. Zach Summerlin.
Hey, Tracy. I can hear you and see the screen.
Okay, great. Thanks, Zach. And for non-committee members, when you hear your name, please verbally confirm that you can both hear me and you can see the spreadsheet on your computer. Kenny Derrickson.
I can hear you and see the screen.
Thanks, Kenny. Matt Jugenheimer.
Yes, I can hear you and see the screen.
Thanks, Matt. Liz Thorpe.
Hi, yes, I can hear you and see the screen.
Thanks, Liz. And we won't have a representative from the Inspector General's office on the line today since there's only one lottery number, and we won't have a need to verify that. So for the Development Finance Department, our representatives will be Matt Jugenheimer and Jean Salmonson. I know Matt already confirmed that he can hear and see. Jean, can you confirm as well, please?
Yes, I do confirm. I can hear you and see the screen.
Thank you, Jean. And Betty Zackham is on with the legal department. Betty, can you confirm that you can hear me and see the spreadsheet?
Good morning, Tracy. I can hear you and see the spreadsheet.
Thanks, Betty. This meeting is being recorded and the recording will be posted on the RFA webpage once it is available. Jean, where will you be posting the results of this meeting on Florida Housing website after the meeting?
There's an RFA webpage for this RFA 2021-108. And right now that's where you found the registration instructions for how to register for this webinar. And I'll be replacing that with this information. I'll have spreadsheets we create today, as well as the recording for this workshop. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean. I will now open the floor for discussion and comments amongst review committee members. Okay, hearing none, we'll begin to provide scores for the record. Matt, would you like to tell us about the spreadsheet we can see on our monitors and sorting?
Sure, thank you, Tracy. On the screen is a list of all items that were scored, and they are separated by goals, points, eligibility, and tiebreakers. For the goals, I'll enter all Ys, and if there's an exception, the score will let me know. And in this particular cell for this line item, there's a formula that will automatically populate with a Y if all goal requirements are met. For the points items, There's a maximum of 140 points. As there is only one applicant, I will enter the scores as reported for each line item as we go through the line items one by one. The bottom of the points section has a cell with a function that will sum all of the points from above. And I should also point out that there is a tiebreaker as a component from this point section. It's item C1, operating management experience, maximum 45 points. The next section is eligibility items. For the eligibility items, I'll enter all Ys, and if there's an exception, the score will let me know. And again, at the bottom of the eligibility requirements, there is a line item that will populate with a Y if all eligibility requirements are met. And then lastly, we have tiebreakers. And for the tiebreaker section, we have 4 items. For the qualifying financial assistance funding preference, per unit construction funding preference, and for the job creation preference, I will populate each item with a Y, and the score will notify me if there are any exceptions. The final tiebreaker, of course, will be the lottery number, but as there is only one application, it's really not going to come into play. The only tiebreaker that's not handled on this particular tab is leveraging, which we'll discuss later. It's on the next tab. Jean is on the call and not on the committee, and will be helping to verify the scores. We will make sure that Jean, the spreadsheet, and the scores all have the same information. Then we'll start working on the next tab, which is the All Applications tab. This particular tab is similar to the app submitted report that was posted when the application came in. We have some blank columns that we'll be able to copy and paste information from the first tab, at which point we'll be able to make our funding selection and build a spreadsheet that we will take to the board at the next board meeting on June 18th. And that's it.
Thank you, Matt.
Yep.
All right, if you'll click back over to the Enter Scores tab and scroll up to the top, we will start with entering scores. And so,
Tracy, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to let you know, I just heard from Elaine separately that she lost her internet connection. So I'm going to, hopefully she'll get it back before we get to her. Feel free to talk slowly until we get to her item. But she's trying to reboot, and then we will, we might have to come back to her score, or I might call her separately and report her scores if that's okay with Betty on the line.
okay, that sounds good. We'll just start going, and if she can get back in time, great. If not, we'll just move past her and then go back and record her scores after the fact.
Okay, and I'll also suggest her that she calls in too. So we'll get there.
Okay, thanks, Jean. Appreciate it. Okay, for the goal items, Rachel, for 3G, was confirmation that the development was submitted in RFA 2021-106, but not awarded provided.
Yes, there were no exceptions.
Thank you. For 10, are the housing credit and grant request amounts in the RFA equal to or less than the housing credit and grant request amounts in RFA 2021-106? I scored that item. I scored all applications, and there were no exceptions. Was the Exhibit A application from RFA 2021-106 submitted as Attachment 6? Rachel, did you score all applications, and were there any exceptions?
I did score all applications, and there was no exception.
Thank you. Okay, moving down to the points items. Corey, for bookmarking attachments prior to submission, Section 3A2B, with a total of 5 points. How many points were awarded?
5 points were awarded.
Thank you, Corey. Rachel, for 3C, 3B, development experience withdrawal incentive, with a maximum of 5 points. How many points were awarded?
5 points.
Thank you. And for 3B, 3C, 67 ER 20-1 disincentive with a maximum of 5 points. Rachel, how many points were awarded?
5 points were awarded.
Thank you. For 3C2, submission of principal disclosure form that is either A, stamped approved at least 14 calendar days prior to the application deadline, or stamped received by the corporation at least 14 calendar days prior to the application deadline, and stamped approved prior to the application deadline, the maximum of 5 points. Rachel, how many points were awarded?
5 points were awarded.
Thank you. All right, let's check in and see if Elaine has made it on the call yet. I'm looking, I don't see her on yet. So
Well-
we will just, oh,
Oh, no,
Are you
I'm sorry,
there?
that was me. That was Jean.
Jean.
I wanted to say that because the applications met the goal, or the application met the goal, of course, there's a language in the RFA that says that they will, for the narrative scores, they'll be using their same points that were awarded in 2021, 106 in the last RFA. And so I do have those scores, and I've verified with Elaine, and I'd be happy to report those again, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, wonderful. Yeah, that's great. So for C1, operating managing experience with a maximum of 45 points, how many points did Elaine award?
In RFA 2021-106, she awarded 41 points. So those will, because they qualify for the goal, that'll be the same point value here.
Perfect, thank you. For C2A, access to community-based general services with a maximum of 20 points. Diana, how many points were awarded?
19 points.
Thank you. And Jane, back to you reporting for Elaine. For C2B, access to community-based services and resources that address tenants' needs with a maximum of 35 points. How many points were awarded?
32.
Thank you. And Zach, for C3A, assist intended residents in meeting their housing stability needs, goals, and expectations.
This section scored 7.
7, thank you. For C3B, assist intended residents in meeting their self-sufficiency needs, goals, and expectations.
This section also scored 7.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to eligibility requirements. Corey, for submission requirements, met section 3A. Oh, hang on, I can't see. Yeah, you can do one at a time if that's easier. Oops, and just like pull it down one at a time. Oh, okay, that's fine. Okay, for submission requirements, met section 3A, were there any exceptions?
No exceptions.
For 1, applicant certification and acknowledgement form provided and meets requirements. Any exceptions?
No exceptions.
For 2C, demographic commitment description provided.
No exceptions.
Thank you. And then Rachel, for 3A1, name of applicant provided.
No exceptions.
For 3A2, evidenced applicant is a legally formed entity provided.
No exceptions.
3A3, evidence applicant qualifies as a nonprofit applicant provided.
Yes, there were no exceptions.
Thank you. 3A4, services coordination experience requirement met.
Yes, no exceptions.
3B1, name of each developer provided.
No exceptions.
3B2, evidence that each developer entity is a legally formed entity provided.
No exceptions.
3B3A, developer experience requirement met.
No exceptions.
3C1, principles for applicant and developer's disclosure form provided and meets requirements.
No exceptions.
3D, name and contact information of management company provided.
No exception.
3E, confirmation provided that the board of directors affiliated with the nonprofit entity that is part of the applicant entity has a majority of individuals that are non-related board members of any tenants or applicants for tenancy.
Yeah, no exceptions.
3F1, authorized principal representative provided.
No exceptions.
Thank you. And Corey, for 4A, name of proposed development provided.
No exceptions.
4B1, development category selected.
exceptions.
4B2, development category qualifying conditions met.
No exceptions.
4C, development type provided.
No exceptions.
4E, breakdown of number of units associated with each development category, development type, or ESS, non-ESS construction if applicable.
No exceptions.
5A, county identified.
No exceptions.
5B, address of development site provided.
No exceptions.
5C, question whether a scattered sites development answered.
No exceptions.
5D1, development location point provided.
No exceptions.
5D2, latitude and longitude coordinates for any scattered sites provided if applicable.
No exceptions.
6A, total number of units provided and within limits.
No exceptions.
6B, number of new construction units and rehabilitation units provided.
No exceptions.
6C1, minimum set-aside election provided.
No exceptions.
6C2, total set-aside breakdown chart properly completed.
No exceptions.
6D, unit mix provided and meets requirements.
No exceptions.
6E, number of residential buildings provided.
No exceptions.
7A, evidence of site control provided.
No exceptions.
7B1, appropriate zoning demonstrated.
No exceptions.
7B2, availability of water demonstrated.
No exceptions.
7B3, availability of sewer demonstrated.
No exceptions.
8D3, green building certification or minimum additional green building features selected as applicable.
No exceptions.
Thank you. Okay, for 10A1, applicant's housing credit request amount provided, there were no exceptions. For 10A2, applicant's grant request amount provided, there were no exceptions. For 10C, development cost pro forma provided, listing expenses or uses, and construction rehab analysis and permanent analysis, listing sources. Sources must meet or exceed uses. There were no exceptions. I just did want to note, though, that the ZCTA number provided in the application is not a valid ZCTA number. However, the applicant still qualifies for the basis boost, as would all applicants of the RFA per the RFA language. And that's based on the demographic. Okay, for total development cost per unit limitation met, section 5A1, no exceptions. Liz Thorpe, for verification of no prior acceptance to an invitation to enter credit underwriting for the same development in a previous RFA, section 5A1. Were there any exceptions?
Hi, Liz Thorpe, not on the committee. There were no exceptions.
Thanks, Liz. And for verification of no recent deobligations, section 5A1, were there any exceptions?
No exceptions.
Okay. One of the last items in the eligibility requirements is the past due report. So we will now hear from Kenny Derrickson.
This is Kenny Derrickson, not on the committee. We reviewed the past due report for any financial obligations for which an applicant or developer or principal, affiliate, or financial beneficiary of the applicant or developer is in arrears to the corporation or any agent or assignee of the corporation, as reflected on the most recently published past due report posted to the corporation's website, but not more recently than 5 business days prior to today's committee meeting. As of the close of business yesterday, there were none.
Thank you, Kenny. And now for the tiebreakers for 10D, qualifying financial assistance funding preference. There were no exceptions. The applicant qualified for the preference. For 10E, per unit construction funding preference, no exceptions. The applicant qualified for the preference. And for the Florida job creation preference, no exceptions. The applicant qualified for the preference. And again, lottery number, there's only one application, so we don't have a need to verify that. It is one. So we will move forward. And now, Matt, will you please confirm the scores and conduct ranking?
Sure, thanks, Tracy. I want to go ahead and reread the scores to ensure that I've entered everything correctly. So we're going to start with Rachel and goals. Rachel, there was no exception for 3G, was confirmation that the development was submitted in RFA 2021-106, but no award provided.
Yes, that's correct.
Tracy, there was no exception to 10. Are the housing credit and grant request amounts in the RFA equal to or less than the housing credit and grant request amounts in RFA 2021-106?
Correct.
And Rachel, once again, there was no exception to whether or not the Exhibit A from the RFA 2021-106 was submitted as Attachment 6.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And Corey, please confirm that you awarded 5 points to bookmarking attachments to submission.
That is correct.
Okay. Rachel, please confirm that you awarded 5 points to each of the following: developer experience withdrawal disincentive, 67 ER 20-1 disincentive, and 3C submission of principal disclosure form that is either stamped approved at least 14 calendar days prior to the applicant deadline, or stamped received by the corporation at least 14 calendar days prior to the application deadline and stamped approved prior to the application deadline.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Do we have Elaine yet? Not seeing her.
I believe she's on the phone.
Who's
Elaine, I just
looking at-
unmuted you.
Okay.
Okay, hi Elaine.
Okay, hi.
Could you confirm that you awarded 41 points for C1 operating managing experience?
That is correct, 41.
Okay, thank you. Diana, could you confirm that you awarded 19 points to C2A access to community-based general services?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And Elaine, once again, can you confirm 32 points for access to community-based services and resources that address tenants' needs?
32 points is correct.
Thank you. And Zach, can you confirm that you awarded 7 points to each of the following? 7.3A, assist intended residents in meeting their housing stability needs, goals, and expectations. And C3B, assist intended residents in meeting their self-sufficiency needs, goals, and expectations.
That's correct. I scored 7 for both.
Okay, thank you very much. Now back to Corey. Can you confirm that there were no exceptions for the following? Submission requirements met. Applicant certification and acknowledgement form provided and meets requirements. And demographic commitment description provided.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you, Corey. Rachel, can you confirm that there were no exceptions for all of the following? 3A1, name of applicant provided. 3A2, evidence applicant is a legally formed entity provided. 3A3, evidence applicant qualifies as a nonprofit applicant provided. 3A4, services coordination experience requirement met. 3B1, name of each developer provided. 3B2, evidence that each developer entity is a legally formed entity provided. 3B3, developer experience requirement met. 3C1, principles for applicant developer disclosure form provided and meets requirements. 3D, name and contact information of management company provided. 3E, confirmation provided that the board of directors affiliated with the nonprofit entity that is part of the applicant entity has a majority of individuals that are non-related board members of any tenants or applicants for tenancy. 3F1, authorized principal representative provided.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Back to Corey. Corey, can you confirm there were no exceptions to all of the following? 4A, name of proposed development provided. 4B1, development category selected. 4B2, development category qualifying conditions met. 4C, development type provided. 4E, breakdown of number of units associated with each development category, development type, or ESS, non-ESS construction if applicable. 4A, county identified. 5B, Address of development site provided. 5C, question whether a scattered sites development answered. 5D1, development location point provided. 5D2, latitude and longitude coordinates for any scattered sites provided if applicable. 6A, total number of units provided and within limits. 6B, number of new construction units and rehab units provided. 6C1, minimum set-aside election provided. 6C2, total set-aside breakdown chart properly completed. 6D, unit mix provided and meets requirements. 6E, number of residential buildings provided. 7A, evidence of site control provided. And then 7B1, appropriate zoning, water and sewer demonstrated. That's 7B1 through 7B3. 8D3, green building certification or minimum additional green building features selected as applicable.
Yes, that is correct.
Great, thank you, Corey. Tracy, can you confirm there were no exceptions for the following? 10A1, applicant's housing credit request amount provided. 10A2, applicant's grant request amount provided. 10C, development cost pro forma provided. Listing expenses or uses and construction rehab analysis and permanent analysis. Listing sources. Sources must equal or exceed uses. And total development cost per unit limitation met.
Correct. No exceptions.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Liz, can you confirm that there were no exceptions to verification of no prior acceptance to an invitation to enter credit underwriting for the same development in a previous RFA, and verification of no recent obligations?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Kenny, can you confirm that there was no exception for financial arrears met?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. And back to Tracy, can you confirm that there were no exceptions to the following? Qualifying financial assistance funding preference met. Per unit construction funding preference met. Total job creation preference met.
Correct. No exceptions.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. And again, the lottery number is 1, as there is only one application for this RFA. Okay, so now that we have the scores, we're now ready to copy and paste the information over to the next tab, which is similar to the application submitted report. And to begin, we are going to start with the eligibility. And we are going to take this yes. It tells us that all of the eligibility requirements above it have been satisfied. And we're going to bring that over here, and we are going to paste special formulas and number formats, getting rid of the, values and number formats, getting rid of the formula. And next we have eligible for goal. And goal is a yes, and we're going to repeat this same procedure. Values and number formats, okay. Total points. Values and number. Okay, and this is the other tiebreaker that is a component of total points that I talked about earlier. And that is this cell right here. Okay. And then we're going to take these tiebreakers all at once. Just for the sake of brevity. And we're going to perform the same function, but this time we're going to add transpose, changing it from a vertical to a horizontal orientation. And now that we have all of the numbers in, I'm going to ask Jean if she could help me one more time and verify that this data is correct, starting with the eligibility eligible for funding column.
Yes.
The sole application is eligible for funding. Met the goals of the RFA. Received 126 total points, with 41 points for managing permanent supportive housing experience. And then the application qualified for qualifying financial assistance preference, per unit construction funding preference, Florida job creation preference, and has a lottery number of 1.
Yes, I have the same thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jean. All right, now that we have all of this information, I'm going to go ahead and save this spreadsheet. And we're going to confirm the total corporation funding per set aside tiebreaker. Even though we just have the one application, I want to make sure that the information for the application is accurate. So in looking at RFA 2021-108 on page 85 of 119, there's a section called leveraging classification, which discusses total corporation funding per set aside unit and the various factors which come into play, including both eligible housing credit and grant request amounts. As you can see from this cell, we have calculated total corporation funding per set aside using the math described in this portion of the RFA. Before we go any further, I want to make sure that there were no changes to the request amounts during scoring. And if there were, I'll need to update the spreadsheet accordingly. That said, Tracy, did the housing credit or grant request amounts change during scoring?
No, they did not.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. So we know that the total corporation funding set aside amount is valid, and this spreadsheet can be one of the spreadsheets we bring to the board meeting showing the application and the results of all scores. Now, if we turn to page 54, we begin the scoring and evaluation process for this RFA, starting with a description of the eligibility and points items that we have been covering. The selection process begins on page 58, starting with the description of the funding available, which is $183,000 of competitive housing credits, plus a binding commitment, and $4.6 million in grant funding. The next section describes the sorting order, which would have been used if there were multiple eligible applications, but it won't apply here because we only have one eligible application. The next section describes the goal, and we've already established that this application qualifies for the goal. That's followed by a county award tally, again, which becomes a moot point simply because there's only one application for this RFA, so it does not apply. And then finally, bear with me, folks. Finally, we are going to get to the funding selection process and how we fund our first application. The first application selected for funding will be the highest ranking eligible application that qualifies for the goal to fund one development that was submitted but not awarded in RFA 2021-106. If the selected application's eligible housing credit request amount cannot be fully funded, it will be entitled to receive a binding commitment for the unfunded balance. So I think I skipped a step here, folks. This is the only eligible application that we have. So I need to go ahead and copy that and paste it over to our recommendations tab. And in doing so, you will see these numbers of that describe the amount of funds that we have available and what's left after we select the one and only eligible application for this RFA. Once we have selected this application, no further applications will be selected for funding, and the remaining housing credits and grant funding will be distributed as approved by the board. I should also point out that you can see here that there's a deficit of housing credit. However, there is a binding commitment, which will take care of that. So as it is, that will complete the funding selection process for this RFA.
Thank you. Matt, will you please read the application selected for funding into the record?
Yes. The selection for the record is 2021-324CG, Charlie Golf. And the name of the development is Baytown Apartments.
Thank you. Do we have a motion from the committee to accept the scores and recommendations for funding today?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Do we have a motion to recommend to the board that it adopt the scores and recommendations for funding of the review committee?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Do we have a motion to adjourn this review committee meeting?
So moved.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All of those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned at 10:37 a.m. Thank you, everyone.